The shrill ring of my phone pierced the quiet of my kitchen. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered, expecting to hear Rachel's cheerful voice. Instead, my daughter's sobs crackled through the speaker. "Mom, I can't stand living here anymore," Rachel wailed. "They treat me like a stranger and won't let me visit Dad." My heart clenched. "Sweetheart, slow down. What's going on?" "Aunt Linda and Uncle Gary," she hiccuped. "They're awful. I feel like a prisoner." I gripped the counter, steadying myself. "What do you mean they won't let you visit your father?" "They say he's a bad influence," Rachel sniffled, "that I shouldn't waste my time with him. Mom, I want to come home." "Of course, honey," I said, my mind racing. "We'll figure this out, I promise." As soon as we hung up, I dialed Robert's number. My husband answered on the third ring, his voice gruff. "Evelyn? What's wrong?" "It's Rachel," I said. "She just called hysterical. Did you know Linda and Gary have been keeping her from seeing you?" Robert sighed heavily. "Come on, Ev, you know how dramatic teenagers can be." "This isn't drama, Robert," I snapped. "Your sister is manipulating our daughter, again." "Now, hold on," he started, but I cut him off. "No, you hold on. Our daughter is hurting and you're defending Linda. When are you going to put our family first?" The line went quiet for a moment. "Let me talk to Linda," Robert finally said. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I'm sure there has been, but not the kind you're thinking." After hanging up, I paced the kitchen, my mind whirling. Linda had always been a thorn in my side, but this was a new low. I thought back to the day Rachel announced she was moving in with her aunt and uncle. Linda had been so sickeningly sweet, promising to guide Rachel through her college years. The doorbell startled me from my thoughts. I opened the front door to find my best friend, Patricia, holding a bottle of wine. "I could hear you fuming from down the street," she said with a wry smile. "Thought you might need this." I ushered her inside, grateful for the company. As we settled on the couch, I filled Patricia in on Rachel's call and Robert's dismissive response. Patricia's eyes widened. "That witch," she muttered. "And Robert's still making excuses for her?" I nodded, taking a long sip of wine. "I don't know what to do, Pat. I can't just sit here while Linda poisons Rachel against us." "Then don't," Patricia said firmly. "Fight back. You've let Linda walk all over you for years. It's time to show her you're not going to take it anymore." I stared at my friend, a mix of fear and determination bubbling up inside me. "You're right," I said slowly. "But how?" Patricia leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "We start digging. Linda's bound to have skeletons in her closet. Find them and use them." As we brainstormed, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Aunt Linda took my phone, using Gary's iPad. Please help." My hands shook as I showed Patricia the message. "That's it," I said, standing up. "I'm going over there right now." Patricia grabbed my arm. "Wait, Evelyn, we need a plan. Charging in there will only make things worse." I sank back onto the couch, deflated. "You're right, but I can't just abandon Rachel." "We won't," Patricia assured me. "But we need to be smart about this. Linda's played this game for years. It's time to beat her at it." As we plotted our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long, painful battle. But for Rachel's sake, I was ready to fight. Linda had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I marched into Robert's study, determined to make him see reason. He looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowing at my expression. "We need to talk about Rachel," I said, my voice tight with frustration. Robert sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Evelyn, I told you it's just teenage drama. Linda wouldn't." "Stop defending her!" I snapped. "Our daughter is miserable, and you're brushing it off like it's nothing." "You're overreacting," Robert said, his tone patronizing. "Rachel's always been sensitive. She'll adjust." I felt my temper flare. "Overreacting? Robert, they're controlling her every move. How can you not see what's happening?" Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel, using Gary's iPad again. My heart raced as I read her message. "Uncle Gary told me you and Dad are planning to divorce. Is it true?" I showed Robert the text, watching the color drain from his face. "Still think I'm overreacting?" I asked coldly. Robert's jaw clenched. "I'll talk to Gary. This is getting out of hand." "Getting out of hand?" I laughed bitterly. "It's been out of hand since the day Rachel moved in with them. Why can't you stand up to your sister for once?" "You don't understand," Robert muttered, avoiding my gaze. "It's complicated." "Then explain it to me," I demanded. What hold does Linda have over you?" Robert's silence spoke volumes. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized there was more to this story than I knew. "Robert," I said slowly, "what aren't you telling me?" He opened his mouth to respond when Rachel burst through the front door, tears streaming down her face. We rushed to meet her in the hallway. "Rachel, honey, what happened?" I asked, pulling her into a hug. Between sobs, she choked out, I heard Aunt Linda on the phone. She was talking about Dad, about some woman named Melissa." I felt Robert stiffen beside me. "What about Melissa?" he asked, his voice strained. Rachel looked up at him, her eyes wide. She said you had an affair with her, that you have another kid." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stumbled back, staring at Robert in disbelief. "Is this true?" Robert's face crumpled. "Evelyn, I can explain." I cut him off, my voice ice cold. "Just don't." Rachel looked between us, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have said anything." I pulled her close, stroking her hair. "No, sweetheart, you did the right thing. This isn't your fault." Robert reached out, but I flinched away. "Both of you, just give me a minute," I said, retreating to the kitchen. My hands shook as I gripped the counter, trying to process this bombshell. An affair, another child. How long had Linda known? How long had she been using this to manipulate Robert? I heard hushed voices from the hallway, then footsteps approaching. Robert appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Evelyn," he began, "I know I've made mistakes, but..." "Mistakes?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You call this a mistake? How long, Robert? How long have you been lying to me?" He flinched at my words. "It was years ago, before Rachel was born. I never meant for any of this to happen." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "And Linda's known all this time, hasn't she? That's why you always take her side. She's been blackmailing you." Robert's silence was all the confirmation I needed. I felt a surge of determination, tinged with rage. "Well," I said, straightening up, "it ends now. I won't let Linda use this to control our family anymore. And you," I pointed at Robert, "you have a lot of explaining to do. To me and to your daughter." As I brushed past him to comfort Rachel, I realized this was just the beginning. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for war. The annual Parker family barbecue was always a tense affair, but this year, the air crackled with unspoken accusations and barely concealed hostility. I stood at the grill, flipping burgers with more force than necessary, my eyes constantly darting to Linda's smug face across the yard. Rachel huddled near me, her eyes downcast. "Mom, I don't want to be here," she whispered. "I know, sweetie," I murmured. "We'll leave soon, I promise." Robert approached, his face a mask of forced cheerfulness. "Everything okay over here?" Before I could answer, Linda sauntered over, Gary trailing behind her like an obedient puppy. "Oh, Robert," she cooed. "I was just telling everyone how proud we are of Rachel. She's become such a wonderful little housekeeper at our place." I felt Rachel stiffen beside me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Linda's smile was saccharine. "Well, she's just so good at keeping things tidy. Dishes, laundry, you name it. We hardly have to lift a finger anymore." "That's not Rachel's job," I snapped. "She's there to focus on her studies, not be your maid." "Now, Evelyn," Linda skied, "don't be so sensitive. Rachel needs to learn responsibility." "Responsibility?" I echoed, my temper flaring. "Is that what you call exploiting my daughter?" Robert stepped between us. "Ladies, please, this isn't the time or place." I rounded on him. "And when is the time, Robert? When are you going to stand up for your daughter?" The gathering had gone quiet, all eyes on our little group. Linda's smile never wavered. "Your daughter is just like you, Evelyn, always overreacting." Something inside me snapped. "Overreacting? You've been manipulating and controlling Rachel since the day she moved in. You've restricted her allowance, cut her off from her friends, and now I find out you've been using her as free labor?" Linda's eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful little..." "That's enough!" Robert's voice boomed across the yard. For a moment, I thought he was finally taking our side, but then he turned to me, his expression cold. "Evelyn, you're making a scene. Maybe you should take Rachel home." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're still defending her? After everything?" Rachel tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, please, can we just go?" I nodded, my heart breaking for my daughter. As we turned to leave, Linda called out, "Oh, Rachel, dear, don't forget you promised to help me with the church fundraiser next weekend." Rachel froze. I can't," she stammered. I have plans with Mom. Linda's eyes glittered. But you promised, dear, you wouldn't want to disappoint the whole congregation, would you? I saw the conflict on Rachel's face and made a split-second decision. Actually, Linda, I said, my voice steady, Rachel won't be available. She's moving back home, today. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face contorted with rage. You can't do that, she hissed. Watch me, I retorted, putting an arm around Rachel's shoulders. As we walked away, I heard Linda's shrill voice behind us. Robert, are you going to let her do this? After everything we've done for you? I didn't wait to hear Robert's response. In the car, Rachel burst into tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have told you sooner about everything. I squeezed her hand. This isn't your fault, sweetheart. We're going to fix this, I promise. As we drove home, my mind raced. I knew this was far from over. Linda wouldn't let Rachel go without a fight, and I had a sinking feeling that Robert would once again side with his sister. But looking at Rachel's tear-stained face, I felt a fierce determination well up inside me. No matter what it took, I would protect my daughter and expose Linda's manipulations. The gloves were off, and I was ready for battle. The moment Robert walked through the door that evening, I was ready for him. Rachel had gone to bed early, exhausted from the day's events, leaving us alone to confront the elephant in the room. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. Robert sighed, loosening his tie. Evelyn, if this is about the barbecue, this is about everything, I cut him off. Your sister, your daughter, your complete inability to stand up for your family. His face hardened. That's not fair. You know how complicated things are with Linda. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. What I know is that our daughter was miserable living with her, and you did nothing. Linda was trying to help, Robert argued weakly. I felt my temper flare. Help? By treating Rachel like a servant? By cutting her off from her friends and family? You're exaggerating, he muttered, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Am I? I challenged. Then explain to me why you stood there and let Linda humiliate me in front of everyone, why you're always taking her side over ours. Robert's shoulders slumped. It's not that simple, Evelyn. Linda, she knows things. About me, about our family, things that could destroy us if they came out. I felt a chill run down my spine. What things, Robert? What could possibly justify letting your sister treat your daughter this way? He opened his mouth to respond when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda. You think you've won? Think again. Rachel comes back, or everyone learns Robert's dirty little secret. I showed Robert the message, watching the color drain from his face. What secret, Robert? I demanded. What does she have on you? He collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. I made a mistake years ago. Before Rachel was born, there was another woman, and there's a child. Linda's the only one who knows. The room seemed to spin. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. You have another child? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Robert nodded miserably. I've been paying child support in secret all these years. Linda found out, and she's been using it to control me ever since. Rage and betrayal warred within me. How could you keep this from me? From Rachel? I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid of losing you, of hurting Rachel. Linda swore she'd keep it secret if I did what she wanted. And what she wanted was to control our lives, I said bitterly. To drive a wedge between us and Rachel. Robert reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Evelyn, please. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I love you and Rachel more than anything. We can fix this. I stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. A man torn between loyalty to his sister and love for his family, paralyzed by fear and guilt. You're right, I said slowly. We can fix this, but not by giving in to Linda's blackmail. Robert's eyes widened. What are you saying? I straightened up, a plan forming in my mind. I'm saying it's time we take control of our own story. We tell Rachel the truth, all of it, and then we confront Linda together. But the scandal, the family. The family is already in shambles, I interrupted. At least this way we're being honest. It's the only way to break Linda's hold over us. Robert looked terrified, but I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. You'd stand by me, even after learning this? I took a deep breath. I'm furious with you, Robert, but I love our family too much to let Linda destroy it. We'll deal with your betrayal, but first we need to unite against the real enemy. As I spoke the words, I felt a surge of determination. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt like we had a fighting chance. "Okay," Robert said quietly. "Let's do it. Let's tell Rachel everything." I nodded, steeling myself for the conversation that would change our family forever. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The morning after our confrontation, Robert and I sat Rachel down to tell her everything. Her face crumpled as Robert confessed to his affair and the existence of her half-sibling. I held her hand tightly, my heart breaking as I watched her world shift beneath her feet. "Why now?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me this after all these years?" I took a deep breath. "Because Aunt Linda has been using this information to control us, sweetheart, and we're not going to let her do that anymore." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "So that's why you always let her walk all over us, Dad? Because you were afraid of your own mistakes?" Robert nodded, shame etched across his face. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. I thought I was protecting our family, but I was just making things worse." As we talked through the implications, my phone buzzed incessantly. I ignored it, focusing on comforting Rachel. But when I finally checked, my blood ran cold. Linda had been busy. There were messages from family members, friends, even our neighbors, all of them expressing shock, disappointment, and in some cases outright disgust. Linda had spread the news of Robert's affair far and wide, twisting the narrative to paint me as the villain who had torn the family apart by overreacting to an ancient indiscretion. "She's turned everyone against us," I said, my voice shaking with fury and disbelief. Rachel grabbed my phone, scrolling through the messages with wide eyes. "How could she do this? Doesn't she care about how this affects me?" "Linda only cares about control," Robert said bitterly. "She's always been that way, even when we were kids." I stood up, pacing the room as my mind raced. We need to fight back. We can't let her narrative be the only one out there. Just then, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia, her face etched with concern. "Evelyn, I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay?" I ushered her in, grateful for a friendly face. As we filled Patricia in on the full story, including Robert's confession, her expression hardened. "This ends now," Patricia declared. "Linda's gone too far. We need to expose her for the manipulative snake she is." Rachel, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I want to help. I'm tired of being a pawn in Aunt Linda's games." I looked at my daughter, seeing a determination in her eyes that mirrored my own. "Are you sure, sweetheart? This could get ugly." She nodded firmly. "I'm sure, Mom, it's time we stood up for ourselves." As we began to strategize, another text came through. This time it was from Gary, Linda's husband. "Evelyn, we need to talk. Linda's gone too far. I have information that could help you." I showed the message to the others, a mix of hope and suspicion coursing through me. Could this be the break we needed, or another of Linda's traps? "It could be a setup," Robert warned. "Or it could be our chance to turn the tables," Patricia countered. I looked at each of their faces, Robert's guilt-ridden but determined, Rachel's fierce and ready for battle, Patricia's supportive and strategic. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. "I'm meeting Gary," I announced. "But I'm not going alone. We're in this together now." As we prepared to face whatever Gary had in store, I felt a shift in the air. The fear and shame that had clouded our family for so long was lifting, replaced by a united front against Linda's tyranny. "Whatever happens," I said, looking at my family and friend, "we face it as one. Linda's reign of manipulation ends today." With those words, we stepped out into the uncertain future, ready to reclaim our lives and our family's honor. The battle ahead would be tough, but for the first time in years I felt hope blooming in my chest. We had the truth on our side, and together we were stronger than any lie Linda could spin. The cafe where we agreed to meet Gary was bustling with the lunch crowd, but I barely noticed the noise. My heart pounded as I sat with Patricia, Robert, and Rachel, waiting for Linda's husband to arrive. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked for the 100th time. I nodded, my jaw set. "We need to know what Gary has to say. It might be our only chance to turn the tables on Linda." Rachel squeezed my hand. "We're with you, Mom, no matter what." Just then Gary walked in, looking nervous and disheveled. He slid into the booth, his eyes darting around as if expecting Linda to appear at any moment. "Thank you for meeting us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You said you had information? Gary nodded, pulling out a USB drive. Linda's gone too far this time. I can't be part of it anymore. This drive contains financial records, emails, everything that shows how Linda's been manipulating the family for years. My hands shook as I took the drive. Why are you doing this, Gary? Why now? He looked down, shame etched across his face. I should have done it years ago. But Linda, she has a way of making you feel like you have no choice. But when she started messing with Rachel's future, I knew I had to do something. What do you mean, messing with my future? Rachel asked, her voice sharp. Gary sighed heavily. Linda's been siphoning money from your grandfather's estate, money that was meant for your education, Rachel. She's been using it to fund her own lifestyle and to keep people in line. The shock around the table was palpable. Patricia was the first to recover. We need to go through those files immediately. If what Gary's saying is true, we have more than enough to expose Linda's manipulations. As we prepared to leave, Gary grabbed my arm. Be careful, Evelyn. Linda's desperate. She knows she's losing control, and that makes her dangerous. I nodded, a chill running down my spine. Thank you, Gary, for everything. Back at home, we huddled around my laptop as Patricia, tech-savvy as ever, combed through the files on the drive. With each document she opened, the depth of Linda's deceit became clearer. Look at this, Patricia said, pointing to an email chain. Linda's been blackmailing half the family. She's got dirt on everyone, and she's been using it to keep them in line. Rachel gasped as she read over Patricia's shoulder. She even tried to sabotage my college applications. How could she do this? I felt a rage building inside me, hot and fierce, because she's a control freak who can't stand the idea of anyone challenging her power. As we delved deeper into Linda's web of lies, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I know what you're doing. Meet me at the old boathouse in an hour, or everything you care about goes up in flames. I showed the others, watching their faces pale. It has to be Linda, Robert said. She must have found out about Gary. You can't go, Rachel pleaded. It's too dangerous. But I knew I had no choice. This was our chance to end Linda's reign of terror once and for all. I have to, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. But I'm not going alone. We faced this together, remember? As we piled into the car, heading towards the confrontation that would change everything, I felt a mix of fear and determination. Linda had pushed us to the brink, but we were pushing back. Whatever happened at that boathouse, I knew one thing for certain. Our family would never be the same again. The old boathouse loomed before us, dark and foreboding against the setting sun. As we approached, I gripped the USB drive in my pocket, our secret weapon against Linda's years of manipulation. This was it, the moment of truth. With a deep breath, I pushed open the creaking door, ready to face whatever Linda had in store for us. As we entered the dimly lit boathouse, my heart pounded in my chest. Linda stood in the center, her face a mask of fury and desperation. Gary hovered behind her, looking torn and afraid. Well, Linda sneered. The whole gang's here. How touching. I stepped forward, gripping the USB drive in my pocket. It's over, Linda. We know everything. She laughed, a brittle sound that sent chills down my spine. You think you know everything? You have no idea what I'm capable of. Robert moved to stand beside me. Linda, please, this has gone on long enough. Let's talk about this like family. Family, Linda spat. You gave up the right to call me family when you chose her over me. She pointed at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. Aunt Linda, why? Why did you try to sabotage my future? For a moment, Linda's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of shame, but it was quickly replaced by cold anger. Because you're just like your mother, always taking what should have been mine. What are you talking about? I demanded. Linda's laugh was bitter. Oh, poor naive Evelyn. Did you really think Robert chose you? He was supposed to marry my best friend. I had it all planned out, but then you came along and ruined everything. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I turned to Robert, searching his face for the truth. He looked stricken. Linda, that was years ago. I fell in love with Evelyn. It had nothing to do with your plans. Liar! Linda shrieked. She pulled out a gun, waving it wildly. You've all ruined everything, but I'm not going down alone. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Rachel's terrified face, Robert's protective stance, Patricia's hand reaching for her phone, and in that moment I knew what I had to do. Linda, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have proof of everything you've done, the blackmail, the stolen money, all of it. I pulled out the USB drive. If anything happens to us, this information goes public. You'll lose everything. Linda's hand wavered, the gun shaking in her grip. You're bluffing. Am I? I took a step closer, my heart racing. You've spent years manipulating this family, Linda, but it ends now. We're not your puppets anymore. Gary suddenly moved, grabbing Linda's arm. She's right, Linda. It's over. Please, don't make this worse. For a tense moment, I thought Linda might pull the trigger anyway, but then, like a deflating balloon, all the fight seemed to leave her. The gun clattered to the floor, and she collapsed into sobs. As Gary comforted his wife, I turned to my family. Rachel threw herself into my arms, crying with relief. Robert embraced us both, whispering apologies and words of love. Patricia, ever practical, was already on the phone with the police. It's done, she mouthed to me over Rachel's shoulder. As we waited for the authorities to arrive, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. We had faced our demons and come out the other side. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trusts to rebuild. But for the first time in years, I felt hope blossoming in my chest. Linda's reign of terror was over. Our family had been tested, pushed to the brink, but we had survived. As I held my daughter and husband close, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The sound of sirens in the distance signaled the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As the blue lights flashed through the boathouse windows, I took a deep breath, ready to step into our new future. Scarred, but stronger for having weathered the storm. The weeks following the confrontation at the boathouse were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, family therapy sessions, and long, difficult conversations. Linda and Gary faced the consequences of their actions, both legally and within the family. As I watched them leave the courthouse after their sentencing, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. The Linda I once knew was gone, consumed by her own bitterness and jealousy. Our family gathered at our home for the first time since everything had come to light. The tension in the air was palpable as aunts, uncles, and cousins filed in, their faces a mix of confusion, hurt, and hope. I stood in the center of the living room, my heart pounding. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice shaky but determined. "We've been through a lot as a family, and it's time we face the truth together." Over the next hour, with Robert and Rachel by my side, we laid bare the years of manipulation, the stolen money, and the web of lies Linda had spun. There were gasps of shock, tears of betrayal, and moments of stunned silence. "We're not here to point fingers," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're here to heal, to rebuild the trust that was broken." As the truth sank in, I saw a change come over our family. The walls of suspicion and resentment began to crumble, replaced by a tentative understanding. Aunt Margaret, Linda's staunchest supporter, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Can you ever forgive us?" I hugged her tightly, my own tears falling. There's nothing to forgive. We were all victims of Linda's manipulations. What matters now is that we move forward together. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted. Stories were shared, old wounds acknowledged, and the first tentative steps toward reconciliation were taken. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension and awkward silences, but it was a start. Later that night, as the last of the family left, Robert, Rachel, and I sat together on the porch swing. The weight of the past weeks, months, and years seemed to lift slightly as we gazed at the stars. "Mom," Rachel said softly, "I'm proud of us, for standing up to Aunt Linda, for telling the truth." I squeezed her hand. "Me too, sweetheart. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." Robert cleared his throat. "Evelyn, Rachel, I know I have a lot to make up for. My blindness to Linda's manipulations, my failure to protect our family. I'm so sorry. I promise to do better, to be the husband and father you both deserve." I looked at him, seeing the genuine remorse and love in his eyes. "It won't be easy," I said honestly. "We have a lot of trust to rebuild. But we'll do it together, day by day." Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder. "We've been through so much," she murmured. "Do you think we'll ever be okay?" I wrapped my arms around my daughter, pulling Robert closer too. "We will," I said, feeling a surge of hope in my chest. "We've been through the fire, and we've come out stronger. Together, we can overcome anything." As we sat there, our little family unit holding tight to each other, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trusts to mend, and a family to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited for the future. Linda's shadow no longer loomed over us. We were free to write our own story, to build the kind of loving, supportive family we all deserved. And as I looked at Robert and Rachel, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them united. The night air was cool, filled with the promise of new beginnings. As we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beautiful new start,